Hello, dear viewers. Welcome to another literary journey on our channel. Today we will dive into the icy mists of 19th century Norway, where a young aristocrat will see her world fall apart like snowflakes in the wind, but discover that true nobility does not reside in titles or possessions, but in the dignity of the human heart. This is a story about love that transcends social classes, about ancestral traditions that resist time, and about how destiny can reveal itself in the most unexpected ways. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? What a beautiful diversity of places joins us on this journey, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave that special like so that more stories like this can reach you. Year 1867, Bjørnskogen, Nordstrand Fjord Coast, Norway. The biting wind of the Nordstrand Fjord lashed the windows of Villa Bjørnskogen like ghostly fingers tapping at the door of misfortune. Astrid Haugen pressed her face against the fogged-up glass, watching through the curtain of dancing snow the last moments of a life that would never be the same again. The grey stone halls, which for generations had echoed with the laughter of family parties and piano melodies, now whispered only the lament of the wind that seeped through the cracks. Each piece of furniture carried the golden patina of ancestral memories: the burgundy velvet armchair, where her Aunt Gunhild embroidered stories with silk thread, the oak table where she had learned French and mathematics, the grand piano whose keys her fingers knew like the verses of a prayer. The 19-year-old, with hair as golden as the wheat of summers that would not return, wore a navy blue wool dress that no longer fit her with the same elegance. The subtle hunger of the last few months had sculpted her cheeks, but it had not been able to erase the proud gleam in her green eyes, a legacy of the Nordic seas. In the main living room, her father Olav paced back and forth like a wounded bear in his own den. His trembling hands could not properly hold the glass of aquavit, and the papers scattered on the table revealed the extent of the ruin. Gambling debts accumulated during nights lost in the port warehouses, bets on timber that never arrived, promissory notes signed with the ink of intoxication and despair. Ragnhild, her mother, remained seated by the fireplace like a statue of salt, contemplating Sodom in flames. Her hands, once as delicate as wild rose petals, now clenched the fabric of her skirt, as if they could hold with her fingers the pieces of a life that was shattering. Kari, the younger sister of only 16, took refuge in her room, refusing to accept that they would have to leave everything behind. Her sobs passed through the stone walls like the laments of seagulls lost in a storm. The sound of horse hooves on the compacted snow announced the arrival of the inevitable. Magnus Eriksson appeared like a spectre at the carved wooden gate, a tall 28-year-old man whose wolfskin coat could not mask the youth of his features. He brought with him the scent of pine wood and salt water, in addition to the documents that sealed the Haugen family's fate. There was no cruelty in his brown eyes, only a pragmatic melancholy of someone who knows the relentless intricacies of business. He presented the papers with the discretion of a priest administering the last rites, aware that he was witnessing the end of an era. "Mr. Haugen," his voice resonated low and respectful through the corridors that would soon no longer belong to him, "the documents are in order. The family will have 3 days to gather their personal belongings." Astrid watched everything through the mirror of the dressing table, as if she were watching a play where she herself was only a spectator. She saw her father signing with hands that trembled, not only from the cold, saw her mother rise with the broken dignity of a dethroned queen, saw the young man who now owned everything that had once been her universe. Magnus's gaze crossed hers in the golden reflection of the mirror. For an instant, time froze like the fjords in the heart of winter. There was something in those masculine eyes that she could not decipher: compassion, curiosity, or perhaps the instinctive recognition of a noble soul, even under the disguise of adversity. When he left, taking with him the ancestral keys to Villa Bjørnskogen, Astrid knew that a door had closed forever, but in the mirror she also glimpsed something else, the reflection of a woman she did not yet know, stronger and wiser than the young aristocrat who was about to die. The snow continued to fall outside, covering old footprints and preparing the ground for new paths. What secrets will be hidden under the white cloak of this winter that will forever transform Astrid's destiny? The aroma of warm bread and fish soup escaped through the door of Eric Andersen's tavern like a tempting whisper that made Astrid's stomach painfully contract. 3 weeks had passed since the family had moved to the small fisherman's cabin in the village, where the permanent odor of seaweed and sea salt mixed with the dampness that penetrated to the bones. The cabin had only 2 tiny rooms, with rough wooden walls that let the wind pass through like a sieve. The uneven floorboards groaned underfoot, and the primitive fireplace could barely heat one room at a time. The windows, small as a doll's eyes, filtered a grey light that made everything melancholic. Astrid contemplated her reflection in the cracked mirror she had brought from the villa, one of the few objects they had managed to save. The young aristocrat had given way to a thinner figure, with cheeks hollowed out by need, but the green eyes maintained the same intensity, now tempered by an iron determination. She wrapped herself in the grey wool shawl that had belonged to her grandmother and walked through the narrow alleys of the village to the Lutheran church. The bronze bell struck 2 in the afternoon, echoing over the snow-covered rooftops like a call to prayer or to despair. At the church door under the ancestral oak whose branches extended like open arms to the sky, she found the announcement that would change her destiny. Wanted literate maid for respectable household. Knowledge of French desirable. See Berit Anderson. The name awakened dusty memories. Berit Anderson, the carpenter's daughter, who had become the housekeeper of the very villa where she was born. A discreet woman who had always treated her with respectful deference, but whom she had not seen for years. Astrid took a deep breath of the cold air that burned in her lungs like ice crystals. She knew she was about to cross an invisible line, abandoning Astrid Haugen forever to bring to life a creation of her own. Anna Nilsson, a fisherman's daughter, educated by a charitable pastor. The way back to Villa Björnskogen seemed longer under the weight of the fresh snow and the uncertainties. Each step on the icy ground echoed like the ticking of a clock that marked not only seconds, but the irreversible passage between 2 lives. The villa appeared before her, transformed. The windows she knew like the palms of her own hands now shone with a different light, and smoke rose from the chimneys with the regularity of a house inhabited by strangers. The garden, where she had played in childhood among rose bushes and birches, lay dormant under the white sheet of winter. Berit Anderson received her at the service entrance with the cordial efficiency of someone who interviews dozens of candidates. A 45-year-old woman, with brown hair pulled back in a severe bun, an impeccable white apron over a black dress. Her small, sharp eyes examined Astrid with the precision of a jeweler evaluating a suspicious stone. "Can you read?" The question came out directly without preamble. "Yes, ma'am. French, German and Norwegian." Astrid modulated her voice to sound less educated, deliberately letting slip the rural accent she had heard at the village fairs. Berit raised her eyebrows, impressed. She asked her to read a passage from the Bible in French, and Astrid obeyed, taking care to occasionally hesitate on the more erudite words, as if she had learned them with difficulty. "The pastor who taught you must have been very patient," Berit commented, still examining the young woman carefully. "He was a good man," Astrid replied simply, allowing a shadow of genuine sadness to pass through her eyes. It was not a lie. The private tutor who had taught her languages had indeed been a kind man. The interview continued in the warm kitchen, where the aroma of cinnamon and cardamom awakened memories of past Christmases. Berit explained the functions, cleaning the upper halls, assisting with the dining service, and especially companionship for the master's great-aunt, an elderly lady who needed someone to read to her. "Mrs. Gunhild is very demanding," Berit warned. "She does not tolerate laziness or impertinence, but if you prove to be hard-working and discreet, you will have a home, food, and a modest salary." Astrid accepted with the measured gratitude of someone who finds unexpected salvation. As Berit explained the house's hours and rules, she allowed her eyes to discreetly scan the familiar kitchen. There was the iron stove where the old cook prepared her gingerbread cookies. There was the table where she used to drink hot chocolate on winter mornings. It would be strange to serve in the very rooms where she had learned to waltz, to carry water through the corridors where she had run barefoot in childhood. But something within her, a silent strength inherited from generations of Haugen women, whispered that this was only the first step of a journey whose destination still remained hidden in the mists of the future. When she left the villa with instructions to return the next morning, Astrid, now Anna, walked with firmer steps on the snow. The biting wind no longer frightened her, and even the hunger seemed more bearable. Behind the lit windows of the villa, she did not see Magnus Eriksson watching her figure move away down the driveway. She could not know that something in that elegant gait and upright posture had awakened in him an indefinable curiosity. What secrets of the past will come to light when Astrid returns to the house that was always hers, now as a stranger? The dawn arrived late and cold over Björnskogen, tinging the snow with pink tones reminiscent of wild rose petals scattered through the dormant garden. Astrid, Anna, she must always remember Anna, walked through the service entrance carrying a small bundle with her only belongings, a spare dress, her grandmother's shawl, and hidden at the bottom, the sapphire ring that had been her great-grandmother's, the only piece of jewelry she had managed to save. The kitchen was already bustling with morning activity. Berit commanded the coffee preparations with military efficiency, while two young local maids peeled potatoes and cut bread. The aroma of freshly ground coffee and smoked bacon made Astrid's stomach contract with desire, but she kept her face serene as she received her first instructions. "You'll start with the halls on the first floor," Berit said, handing her cleaning cloths and a bucket of warm water scented with lavender. "Mrs. Gunhild likes everything to be impeccable before lunch, and remember, she doesn't tolerate unnecessary noise." Astrid went up the stairs she knew by heart, each polished oak step a familiar note in a symphony of memories. Her feet automatically found the spots that didn't creak, unconscious knowledge that made her move with ghostly silence through the corridors of her own childhood. The blue salon welcomed her with its familiar morning melancholy. The walls lined with sky-blue silk, the wallpaper with golden floral motifs, the velvet armchairs that no longer occupied the exact same positions. Magnus had rearranged some furniture, and there were new books on the coffee table, volumes on economics and navigation that had never been there before. She began cleaning with mechanical movements, but each object transported her through time. There, in the Venetian mirror with the golden frame, she saw reflected the 12-year-old girl who practiced curtsies for visitors. There, at the window overlooking the garden, she had spent entire afternoons reading French novels while the snow fell softly outside. The sound of masculine footsteps in the corridor made her interrupt her daydreams. Magnus Eriksson appeared at the door, elegant in his morning suit of dark wool, his brown hair still slightly disheveled from sleep. His eyes met hers, and for a moment that lasted an eternity, something indefinable passed between them. Subliminal recognition, mutual curiosity, a connection that transcended words. "Good morning," he said in a low, almost whispered voice, as if he feared breaking some fragile enchantment. "Good morning, sir." Astrid lowered her eyes and made a curtsy that came naturally, too elegant for a simple maid, but he did not seem to notice. Magnus remained for a few seconds watching her work. There was something hypnotic in the way she moved the cloths over the furniture, with intimate knowledge of each curve and surface. When she cleaned the piano, her fingers brushed the keys in silent chords, as if she were playing a melody that only she could hear. "Do you play?" The question escaped without him realizing it. Astrid froze, realizing the slip-up. "A little, sir. The pastor taught me some church songs." Magnus approached the piano, opened the lid, and played a few notes of a Mozart sonata. "Do you know this one?" Astrid's fingers tingled. It was one of the pieces she loved to play the most, a melody she knew as an extension of her own soul. "It is very beautiful, sir. My fiancée would like to learn, but I don't think she has a natural talent for music." There was a strange hesitation when he mentioned Solveig, as if the words left a bitter taste in his mouth. At that moment, a feminine voice echoed from the floor above, high-pitched and slightly imperious. "Magnus, darling, are you down there?" Solveig Lindberg appeared in the salon like a gust of cold wind. Platinum blonde, with blue eyes that matched her French silk dress, she had the obvious beauty of roses cultivated in a greenhouse. Perfect, but without the wild charm of field flowers. She wore a perfume that was too sweet and seemed to compete with the natural scent of lavender that permeated the house. "Oh," she noticed Astrid with the distracted interest with which one observes a new piece of furniture. "The new maid." "Anna Nilsson." Astrid made another curtsy, this one more carefully calculated to appear humble. Solveig approached the piano and tried to play the same Mozart sonata, but her fingers stumbled over the notes, transforming the melody into a succession of dissonant sounds. "I detest this instrument. Why can't it be simpler?" Unconsciously, Astrid whispered the correction. "If you'll permit me, this note would be a C sharp." The silence that followed was tense as the string of a violin about to snap. Magnus looked at her with renewed interest, while Solveig frowned. "And how would a maid know about music?" Solveig's question carried a hint of suspicion. "The pastor was very educated," Astrid replied quickly. "He said that music praises the Lord." Magnus smiled slightly as if he appreciated the answer. "Perhaps you can help my fiancée with her lessons." "Oh, that won't be necessary." Solveig closed the piano lid with unnecessary force. "I have more important things to occupy myself with than church songs." She left the salon with the rigid posture of someone who felt challenged. Magnus remained for a few seconds, looking thoughtfully at Astrid before following her. When she was alone, Astrid allowed herself a moment of weakness. She sat on the piano bench she had so often occupied, and her hands found the keys like birds returning to their nest. She played a few bars at an almost inaudible volume, a melancholic melody that seemed to capture all the longing she carried in her heart. She did not realize that, from the corridor, someone was listening. Gunhild Haugen, leaning on her carved wooden cane, recognized not only the music but the unique way her niece had always played it, with a contained passion that transformed notes into unspoken words. A secret smile touched the elderly woman's lips. Some secrets are like seeds buried in winter. They remain hidden until the right spring allows them to bloom. What revelations await Astrid when she finds herself face to face with the aunt who raised her and who may recognize the truth behind the disguise? The afternoons in Bjørnskogen arrive early during the harsh Norwegian winter, when the sun sets at 3 o'clock and the darkness extends like a velvety cloak over the icy fjords. It is during these moments that Astrid receives her most delicate mission, to keep Mrs. Gunhild Haugen company during the long hours before dinner. Gunhild's room is located on the second floor, in a circular tower that offers a panoramic view of the fjord. The walls are lined with dark wood, decorated with old tapestries that tell stories of Viking kings and goddesses of Nordic mythology. A stone fireplace keeps the room warm, where pine logs crackle, releasing a resinous aroma that intoxicates the senses. Gunhild Haugen, at 65, remained an impressive woman. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elaborate braid. Her eyes were grey-blue like the sea in a storm, and she moved with the dignity of someone who carried centuries of family tradition. Her hands, although marked by age, still embroidered with the precision of an artist, creating pieces that seemed to capture the soul of the ancient sagas. "Sit down, Anna," she said, indicating a moss-green velvet armchair next to the fireplace. "Berit told me you read well. We will start with the scriptures." Astrid took the indicated seat, feeling the strangeness of being in the presence of the aunt who had raised her, now as a stranger. Gunhild handed her a leather-bound Lutheran Bible, but her eyes studied the young woman's face with an attention that went beyond casual curiosity. "Read Psalm 23, the elderly lady instructed, settling into her favorite armchair as the flames danced in the embers. Astrid began the reading in a clear, melodious voice. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want—" But as she continued, something in her intonation began to transform the biblical words. Without consciously realizing it, she incorporated rhythms and cadences she had learned in the old Nordic ballads, making David sound like a Viking skald, chanting verses by an ancestral bonfire. Gunhild listened with growing attention. There was something in that voice that awakened deep echoes in her memory, not just the timbre, but the particular way of giving life to the words, of transforming text into enchantment. This was how Astrid had always read since she was a child, as if each word were a small magic to be released into the air. "An interesting interpretation," Gunhild commented when the reading was over. "The pastor who taught you must have known the old traditions. He said that all sacred stories are connected," Astrid replied carefully, "that the Christian God also spoke through the legends of our ancestors." Gunhild's eyes shone with genuine interest. "And what do you think of the old stories? Of the sagas of Odin and Freyja?" It was a dangerous question, in an era when the Lutheran Church was suspicious of any reverence for pagan traditions. But something in Gunhild's voice, a secret hunger for a connection to the ancestral past, encouraged Astrid to take a risk. "I think they are different ways of talking about the same deep truths," she answered slowly. "Sacrifice, the search for wisdom, love that transforms." Gunhild smiled for the first time since Astrid had arrived at the house. It was a smile that lit up her face like the aurora borealis, revealing the young woman she had once been. "Keep reading," she said, "but this time tell me the story as if we were two Viking women sitting around a fire, waiting for our men to return from the sea." The suggestion freed something deep in Astrid's soul. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the ancestral memory flow through her, and when she began to speak again, her voice carried echoes of forgotten eras. In times when ice covered the land and wolves howled in the eternal forests, there was a shepherd warrior who walked through the dark valleys. He did not fear the cold or the hunger, for he carried within him the certainty that someone greater was watching over his steps. Psalm 23 was transformed into a Nordic saga, where David became a courageous jarl protected by Odin Allfather, where still waters were serene fjords and green pastures were the prairies of Valhalla. Astrid's voice wove images that made the tower room seem like a medieval hall where skalds told stories that mixed the real and the magical. Gunhild listened, hypnotized, her hand still over her embroidery. She recognized not only the narrative talent, but the soul that animated it, the same spark that had always distinguished the women of the Haugen family, capable of seeing invisible connections between seemingly separate worlds. "Extraordinary," she whispered when Astrid finished. "I haven't heard anyone who truly understands the spirit of the old traditions in a long time." At that moment, footsteps in the corridor announced Magnus's presence. He appeared at the door, originally in search of Gunhild for some domestic matter, but he was paralyzed when he heard the last echoes of Astrid's narrative. "Don't stop because of me," he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "I was listening from the corridor. It's a unique interpretation of the scriptures." Gunhild looked at her adopted nephew with eyes that shone with benign mischief. "Anna has a special gift for bringing old stories to life. Perhaps you should stay and listen." Magnus approached hesitantly, as if he feared breaking some fragile enchantment. He sat in a nearby chair, and Astrid felt the intensity of his gaze like physical heat on her skin. "Continue," he whispered. And Astrid continued, weaving stories that mixed Christian and pagan traditions into a narrative tapestry that held the listeners like golden webs. She spoke of fishermen kings who sacrificed themselves for their people, of goddesses who cried tears that became pearls, of love that resisted time and storms. When the darkness deepened outside and the candles had to be lit, the three of them remained united in a silent conspiracy of enchantment. Magnus completely forgot Solveig, who was dining alone on the floor below. Gunhild allowed her embroidery to rest forgotten in her lap, and Astrid felt, for the first time since the loss of the villa, that she had found a place where her true nature could flourish, even if disguised. When she finally got up to leave, Magnus stopped her with a question. "Where did you learn these stories?" "They have always been here," Astrid replied, gesturing vaguely toward the walls of the tower. "This land knows them. You just have to know how to listen." She did not realize that Gunhild was smiling secretly, recognizing in the maid's words the exact echoes of conversations she had had with her niece years before, when she taught little Astrid that old stones hold memories, and that some people are born with the gift of hearing what they whisper. What dangerous feelings will begin to blossom in these intimate evenings, and how will Astrid maintain her disguise when emotions threaten to reveal her true identity? The blizzard arrived in Björnskogen like an enraged beast that lashed the fjord coast with claws of ice and teeth of biting wind. For 3 consecutive days, the villa remained besieged by the storm that transformed the outside world into a white canvas where nothing could be distinguished from more than 6 feet away. Astrid worked tirelessly to keep the house warm and functional. The fireplaces consumed wood at a voracious rate, requiring her to carry heavy logs up the icy stairs to the upper floors. The water froze in the pipes, forcing her to melt snow in cauldrons on the kitchen stove. The windows had to be constantly cleaned of the ice that formed on the inside due to condensation. It was an exhausting job that required physical strength beyond her limits. Her body, already weakened by months of insufficient food, began to show signs of exhaustion. Her hands, once soft as magnolia petals, now had calluses and small cuts. Her shoulders ached constantly under the weight of responsibilities she had never imagined carrying. On the morning of the 3rd day, as she carried a heavy bucket of hot water upstairs for Gunhild's bath, Astrid felt her legs give way. The world spun around her like a demented carousel, and she had to lean against the stone wall to keep from fainting. The bucket slipped from her hands, spilling boiling water onto the oak steps. Berit appeared immediately, attracted by the noise of the fall. "My goodness, girl, you're pale as a ghost." "I'm fine," Astrid tried to straighten up, but her legs refused to support her properly. "I just need a moment." "You're not fine at all." Berit touched her forehead with her experienced palm. "You're feverish. To bed immediately." "I can't. Mrs. Gunhild is waiting, and there is so much work." "Mrs. Gunhild will wait. Let's go." But before Berit could help her, Magnus appeared at the top of the stairs. He had come to get information about the storm when he heard the noise of the fall. He saw Astrid staggering, her face flushed with fever, her green eyes shining with the dangerous glow of illness. Without a second's hesitation, he came down the steps 2 at a time and took her in his arms, as if she were made of precious porcelain. Astrid's body fit against his with a disturbing naturalness, she so delicate in his arms that she seemed like a wounded bird, he feeling his heart race with the unexpected closeness. "Where to?" he asked Berit, already going up the stairs with his precious cargo. The maid's room in the attic. No. Magnus's voice was firm, decisive. Take her to the blue room. It's warmer and more ventilated. Berit opened her mouth to protest. It was not appropriate for a maid to occupy the guest quarters, but something in her master's determined expression made her fall silent. Magnus laid Astrid carefully on the bed with the blue silk quilt, the same one where she had slept as a child during family visits. The velvet curtains filtered the grey light of the storm, creating an atmosphere of intimacy protected from the outside world. "Send for Dr. Hansen in Bergen," he ordered Berit, "immediately. Sir, with this storm no boat can cross the fjord. Then send messengers on horseback along the mountain road. I don't care how much it costs or how dangerous it is. I want the best doctor here before nightfall." The vehemence of his concern surprised even Magnus. Why did he care so much about a maid? But as he watched Astrid breathe with difficulty, her golden hair spread across the linen pillow, he felt something move in his chest, a protective tenderness that went far beyond Christian compassion. During the hours that followed, he visited her repeatedly. He personally brought chamomile tea with honey, adjusted the covers when she trembled from the cold, and cooled her forehead with damp cloths when the fever rose. They were intimate gestures that would have caused gossip to boil in the salons of Bergen, but Magnus didn't care. Solveig, prevented from leaving for the city due to the storm, watched everything with growing irritation. "Why so much concern for a simple peasant girl?" she asked when she found him again on the way to the blue room. "It's a matter of Christian humanity," he replied without stopping, but there was something in his voice that she could not decipher. In the afternoon, when Dr. Hansen finally arrived, an elderly man with a white beard who rode through the blizzard like an ancient warrior, Magnus insisted on accompanying the examination. The doctor diagnosed severe exhaustion combined with the beginning of pneumonia, conditions that could be dangerous if not treated properly. Absolute rest for at least a week, the doctor prescribed. Nutritious food, constant warmth, and someone must watch her during the nights. The fever can rise dangerously. "I will take care of that myself," Magnus declared, ignoring Berit's scandalized look. "Magnus!" Solveig finally exploded. "Have you completely lost your mind? What will people think? That I am a man who does not let anyone die of illness while I can do something to help." He met her gaze with unwavering determination. "If that bothers you, there is a carriage ready to take you back to Bergen as soon as the storm passes." It was the first time Magnus had challenged her so directly. Solveig recoiled, hurt and confused, realizing that something fundamental had changed in the man she planned to marry. During the night, while the storm continued to roar outside, Magnus remained seated in an armchair next to Astrid's bed. She was delirious with fever, mumbling words in French and German, quoting passages from poems that a simple peasant girl should never know. She also spoke of Papa and Mama, with a refined accent that did not match her supposed humble origin, but Magnus did not question these inconsistencies. Instead, he held her feverish hand and whispered words of comfort that he himself did not fully understand. There was something in this young woman, in her silent dignity, in her veiled intelligence, in her ability to transform words into magic, that touched regions of his heart he thought were permanently asleep. When the fever finally broke in the early hours of the fourth day, and Astrid opened her eyes to find Magnus asleep in the armchair beside her, she understood that something irreversible had happened between them during those hours of delirium and care. He woke up feeling the weight of her gaze and smiled with a tenderness that made her heart race dangerously. "How do you feel?" he asked in a voice hoarse with fatigue. "Better. Thank you for everything." She hesitated, realizing the inappropriate intimacy of the situation, but unable to fully regret it. "You scared me," he confessed, and there was a raw honesty in those words that left them vulnerable to each other in a way that transcended social positions. When Berit appeared with the breakfast tray, she found the two of them looking into each other's eyes with an intensity that made the air vibrate with unspoken possibilities. The housekeeper immediately understood that she was witnessing the birth of something that would forever change the destiny of everyone at Villa Björnskogen. What consequences will this intimacy forced by the storm bring, and how will Astrid deal with feelings that are growing dangerously in her disguised heart? The celebration of St. Lucia brought an atmosphere of Nordic magic to Villa Björnskogen that harmoniously mixed with the Christian tradition. White candles illuminated all the windows of the house, creating a golden beacon that shone against the polar darkness of winter. The aroma of gingerbread and mulled wine permeated the corridors, while pine branches and red berries decorated every available surface. Astrid, already recovered from her illness but still thinner and more delicate, moved through the halls like an efficient shadow. She wore her best dress, the only one she had besides her work uniform, a simple navy blue fabric that highlighted the color of her eyes. Berit had allowed her to let her hair fall in golden waves that captured the candlelight like strands of liquid gold. The house was full of guests from Bergen for the celebration, prosperous merchants, Lutheran pastors, families from local society. Solveig shone among them wearing a dress of emerald green silk imported from Paris, her blonde hair pulled back in an elaborate construction of curls and braids ornamented with pearls. She was undeniably beautiful, a perfect socialite who dominated conversations about fashion, popular music, and social gossip. Magnus circulated among the guests, fulfilling his duties as a host, but his eyes constantly searched for Astrid in the halls. Every time he saw her serving mulled wine or arranging platters of sweets, he felt a pang in his heart, a mixture of desire and something he could not name, but which deeply disturbed him. During the evening, when the guests gathered in the main salon to sing traditional songs, a moment occurred that would change everything between them. Solveig, animated by the mulled wine and social attention, decided to demonstrate her musical skills at the piano. She chose a complicated French song, but her fingers stumbled repeatedly on the most difficult passages. "Oh, this detestable instrument!" she exclaimed with a forced laugh, trying to mask her frustration. "Who invented so many unnecessary keys?" One of the guests, a timber merchant from Bergen, commented jovially, "Perhaps you should ask for help from someone more experienced, Miss Lindberg." Solveig looked around, seeking an elegant way out of the embarrassment, when her eyes fell on Astrid, who was collecting empty glasses on a silver tray. "Anna," she called in a honeyed voice that carried disguised poison, "didn't you say the pastor taught you music? Come show us what a simple church song should sound like." It was a cruel trap, designed to humiliate Astrid in front of local society. A maid should never play the piano in the presence of distinguished guests, and any inadequate performance would be a cause for laughter and mockery. Astrid felt all eyes on her. Magnus watched her with a tense expression, clearly concerned about the embarrassment she might suffer. The other guests awaited the spectacle with the morbid interest of someone hoping to witness an accident. For a moment, she considered respectfully declining. It would be the most prudent attitude, one that would keep her disguise intact. But something inside her, perhaps the memory of all the nights she had played on this very piano, or the need to prove that dignity does not depend on social position, made her walk to the instrument. She sat on the bench with the upright posture she had learned in childhood, adjusted her simple skirts with unconscious elegance, and rested her fingers on the keys with a familiarity that aroused suspicious murmurs among those present. Instead of a simple church song, Astrid chose a piece she knew intimately, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Her fingers found the keys like birds returning to their nest, and the music that emerged was of such pure and expressive beauty that it completely silenced the salon. She played not like a maid trying to imitate erudite music, but like a true musician who understood every emotional nuance of the composition. The melody flowed from her fingers, laden with all the longing she held in her heart, all the loss she had suffered, all the impossible love that was growing within her. When the last note faded into the silence, no one moved. The guests remained mesmerized, aware that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Magnus looked at her with an expression that mixed admiration and growing suspicion. No peasant girl played Beethoven with such mastery. Solveig was livid, realizing she had been completely overshadowed by a simple maid. "Very interesting," she managed to say in a strangled voice. "The pastor who taught you must have been truly exceptional." Astrid stood up gracefully, made a curtsy that came from her aristocratic upbringing, and left without a word. But the damage was done. A seed of doubt had been planted that would inevitably germinate. Later, when the guests left and the house returned to silence, Magnus found Astrid in the winter garden. She was sitting on a stone bench, contemplating the full moon that bathed the snow in silvery light. The air was so cold that her breath formed clouds of vapor, but she didn't seem to notice. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, approaching slowly. "You'll get sick again." "I needed some fresh air." She didn't look at him, keeping her eyes fixed on the frozen landscape. Magnus sat beside her, ignoring social conventions. For a few minutes they remained in silence, aware of the closeness that was both dangerous and irresistible. "Where did you really learn to play like that?" The question emerged low, almost whispered. Astrid finally faced him, and he saw frozen tears on her cheeks. "Does it matter?" "To me, yes." He reached out, almost touching her face, but stopped at the last moment. "Anna." or whatever your real name is. You must know that—" "No." She stood up abruptly, moving away from him. "Don't say anything you can't take back. It's too late for that." Magnus also stood up, his voice charged with contained emotion. "You must have realized that I feel— You have a fiancé." The words came out sharp as blades of ice. "An engagement arranged for business. Not love. Still, an engagement. And I am—" She hesitated, almost revealing the truth, but she controlled herself. "A maid." "There are barriers that cannot be crossed." Magnus took a step toward her, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her tremble. "What if I told you that I don't care about barriers, that I would give up everything, position, business, social approval, for you?" The confession hit Astrid like a physical blow. For a moment she wavered, tempted to throw off all the masks and reveal who she really was. But then she remembered her father's humiliation, her family's misery, the impossibility of a future built on lies. "Then I would say that you are speaking like a man blinded by winter fantasy," she replied, forcing coldness into her voice. "Spring always brings clarity and with it regrets. You're wrong. I am being realistic." Astrid took another step back, creating physical and emotional distance. "You are a good man, Magnus Eriksson. You deserve a suitable wife, legitimate children, a respected place in society. Not dangerous games with maids who admire too much." The word "admire" escaped as an involuntary confession, revealing more than she intended. Magnus perceived it and smiled sadly. "So you do feel something." "What I feel doesn't matter." Astrid wrapped herself in her shawl, preparing to leave. "Some paths lead only to destruction, sir. For both of us." She walked away through the snow, leaving Magnus alone under the moonlight. He remained there for a long time, watching her footprints on the icy ground and knowing that, despite the rejection, something irrevocable had happened between them. In the tower room, Gunhild watched the scene through the window, a knowing smile on her lips. She recognized the Haugen's stubbornness in her niece's refusal, but she also saw the genuine love that shone in Magnus's eyes. Some battles, she thought, are worth losing so that the right wars can be won. What consequences will this rejected confession bring, and how will Magnus react to the discovery that his feelings are reciprocated, even if denied? The year 1868 broke over Björnskogen, with a blizzard that seemed to want to erase the last vestiges of the previous year. At the villa, the preparations for the New Year's celebration took place in an atmosphere charged with unspoken tensions. Solveig had arrived from Bergen 3 days earlier, accompanied by her parents, the prosperous merchant Hans Lindberg, and his wife Astrid Lindberg, a severe-looking woman who wore jewelry like social armor. The main salon was decorated with fir branches and golden candles that cast dancing shadows on the silk-lined walls. A long table displayed imported delicacies, Russian caviar, smoked salmon, French wines, and top-quality aquavit. The guests, the cream of Bergen's mercantile society, circulated in elegant suits talking about business, politics, and social gossip. Astrid served discreetly, moving among the groups like an efficient shadow. She wore the impeccable maid's uniform, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, but nothing could completely mask the natural elegance of her movements. Each gesture revealed a refined education that aroused curious looks and whispered comments. Magnus, elegant in a dark tuxedo, fulfilled his duties as a host with automatic courtesy, but his eyes followed Astrid through the salon. Since the night of the confession in the garden, an electrical tension had hung between them. Each casual encounter in the corridors, each time she served wine during meals, each look that accidentally crossed, carried the weight of unspoken words. Solveig, dazzling in a peacock blue silk dress ornamented with Belgian lace, reigned over the party like a queen aware of her power. She distributed calculated smiles, accepted compliments on her beauty, and planned to publicly announce the date of her marriage to Magnus during the midnight toast. "Magnus, darling." She reached him near the fireplace where he was contemplating the flames with an absent expression. "Papa would like to talk about the timber contracts we will sign after our marriage. Are you thinking of June? It's such a romantic time." "Solveig," Magnus interrupted her gently, but his voice carried a determination she had never heard before. "We need to talk, in private." Something in his tone aroused alarm in Solveig's blue eyes. "Now? In the middle of the party?" "Now." He led her to the office, an intimate oak-paneled room where shelves full of books witnessed important conversations. The fireplace crackled softly, and through the window, The snow continued to fall like icy tears from the sky. "What's wrong?" Solveig asked, trying to maintain a jovial tone, but nervousness was evident in her voice. Magnus stood by the window, watching the white-covered garden where he had confessed his feelings for Astrid. "Our engagement was a mistake." The words fell into the silence like stones thrown into still water, creating shock waves that spread throughout the room. "What?" Solveig paled, clutching the back of a leather armchair. "What are you saying? That I cannot marry you?" Magnus turned to face her, and there was genuine sadness in his eyes, but also an unshakable resolve. "It would be unfair to both of us. But our parents have already settled everything. The contracts, the church, the invitations." Solveig stammered, unable to fully process what she was hearing. "The contracts can be undone. The church can be cancelled. The invitations can be withdrawn." "Why?" The question emerged in a choked cry. "What happened? Is there another woman?" Magnus hesitated for a moment that stretched like an eternity. "There is someone who awakened feelings I never knew I had." "Who?" Solveig advanced toward him, her eyes shining with fury and pain. "Who is she? Some lady from Bergen? From Trondheim?" "That doesn't matter. She rejected any possibility between us." "Then why destroy our future for an impossible fantasy?" "Because I discovered that I cannot love you as you deserve to be loved." Magnus's words came out charged with genuine compassion. "You are a wonderful woman, Solveig. Beautiful, educated, perfectly suitable, but it would be cruel to marry knowing that my heart belongs to another." Solveig stared at him for long seconds, processing the magnitude of the humiliation she was about to face. "It's that maid, isn't it?" Magnus's silence was a sufficient answer. That Anna Nielsen," Solveig exploded, her voice rising dangerously. "You are destroying our engagement for a peasant girl? Have you completely lost your mind? My decision is made, and my reputation, and our parents' businesses. Do you have any idea of the scandal this will cause? I deeply regret any embarrassment I may cause you or your family, but I cannot live a lie." The conversation was interrupted when the door opened abruptly. Hans Lindberg burst into the office with a face red with anger, followed by his wife and several guests attracted by Solveig's screams. "What is the meaning of this, Eriksson?" Hans advanced threateningly. "My daughter is in tears, talking about a broken engagement." "Mr. Lindberg," Magnus kept his voice calm despite the approaching storm, "please allow me to explain." "Explain what?" "That you are humiliating my family in front of all of Bergen, that you are destroying business agreements for a whim." "It is not a whim. It is a matter of conscience." "Conscience?" Hans laughed bitterly. "Or lust for a pretty maid?" The accusation hit Magnus like a slap. His fists clenched, but he controlled his anger, aware that any violent reaction would only confirm the suspicions. "My reasons are my own," he replied with icy dignity. "Well," Hans Lindberg adjusted his vest with furious gestures, "I hope your conscience consoles you when no respectable merchant wants to do business with you. I hope it warms you when Bergen society turns its back on you." "Papa, please." Solveig tried to calm her father, but her own tears of humiliation fueled his fury. "No, my daughter. This man has made his choice. Now he will face the consequences." Hans looked around at the guests who were watching the scene with morbid fascination. "Consider yourselves all witnesses. Magnus Eriksson publicly broke his engagement with my daughter on New Year's Eve. Let each one judge the character of a man capable of such discourtesy." The scandal spread through the party like fire in dry straw. The guests whispered among themselves, some expressing shock, others malicious delight at the gossip that would dominate Bergen for months. The most conservative families began to discreetly withdraw, not wanting to be associated with the controversy. From the service corridor, Astrid watched through a crack in the door. She saw Magnus upright and solitary in the center of the storm he himself had provoked, facing social condemnation with a moving dignity. She understood that he had destroyed his own future, for a love she had rejected, and guilt consumed her like a slow fever. When the Lindbergs left, taking a tearful Solveig with them and half the guests followed, Magnus remained in the office, contemplating the consequences of his decision. Through the window, he saw the snow continuing to fall, covering the world with a white cloak that seemed to symbolize the new beginning he had chosen, even if it was a solitary one. Gunhild appeared at the door, leaning on her cane, observing her adopted nephew with eyes that shone with secret approval. "It was brave," she said simply. "It was stupid," Magnus replied, but there was no regret in his voice. "Sometimes the two things are identical." Gunhild smiled enigmatically. "But they are rarely useless." She left him alone with his thoughts. while the church bell marked the arrival of the new year over a Villa Björnskogen, forever transformed by the destructive and creative power of true love. What social and commercial consequences will this scandalous breakup bring? And how will Astrid deal with the guilt of knowing that she caused the social ruin of the man she loves? The first days of January 1868 brought to Björnskogen not only the biting cold of the Nordic winter, but also the icy isolation of social condemnation. The news of the scandalous breakup spread through the region like a devastating avalanche, gaining new details and malicious interpretations with each repetition. In the grey stone Lutheran church that dominated the center of the village, Pastor Olsen conducted the Sunday services with sermons that, without mentioning names, warned against the dangers of lust and disobedience to the customs established by God. His severe eyes often turned to the pew where Magnus usually sat, now empty for 3 consecutive Sundays. The timber trade, the basis of local prosperity, immediately felt the effects of the scandal. Hans Lindberg, wounded in his paternal pride and social position, mobilized his business contacts in a silent but effective boycott campaign. Contracts that seemed guaranteed evaporated like morning mist. Ships that used to dock at the port of Björnskogen headed for competitors, and suppliers began to question the reliability of a man capable of breaking solemn commitments. Magnus faced the commercial storm with the same stoic dignity with which he had endured the social scandal. He worked long hours in his office, sending letters to potential new partners, studying maps of alternative trade routes, and calculating how to keep his employees employed during the crisis. The accounting books revealed a grim reality. Without the Lindberg contracts, the company would lose half of its revenue. Berit watched the situation with growing concern. As an experienced housekeeper, she understood that the fate of the house was intimately linked to the success of Magnus's business. If the company went bankrupt, all the employees would lose their jobs, including Astrid, who carried the secret weight of knowing she was the indirect cause of the catastrophe. "The master is destroying himself over an obsession," Berit commented to one of the maids while preparing breakfast. "Mark my words, this will not end well for anyone." Astrid listened to these whispers as she performed her duties with automatic efficiency, but each word was like a needle stuck in her heart. She saw Magnus walking through the corridors with shoulders bowed by the weight of his worries. She noticed the wrinkles of tension that deepened on his face. She observed how he barely touched his food during solitary meals. The situation reached its critical point on a cold January morning when an official delegation appeared at Villa Björnskogen. 3 respectable men arrived in a black carriage: Pastor Olsen, the merchant Erik Andersson, Berit's father, and Björn Larsson, president of the local commercial association. Magnus received them in the main salon, aware that he was facing an informal but powerful tribunal. The 3 men arranged themselves in the velvet armchairs with the solemnity of judges, while Astrid served coffee and sweets with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. "Magnus," Pastor Olsen began in a voice that resonated with moral authority, "we have come as friends concerned about your soul and your future." "I appreciate the concern," Magnus replied calmly, "although I question whether it is truly friendly." Erik Andersson, a burly man with a red beard, leaned forward. "The community is talking, young man. They say you've lost your mind over a maid, that you destroyed a respectable engagement for sinful lust. The community says many things, not all of them true." "Then tell us the truth," Björn Larsson intervened, whose small, calculating eyes never forgave a penny. "Why did you break an engagement that would benefit not only you but the entire local economy?" Magnus remained silent for long seconds, aware that every word would be weighed and judged. "For reasons of conscience for which I owe no one an explanation except God." "Ah, conscience." Pastor Olsen raised his hands dramatically, the favorite word of those who want to justify sins. "Tell me, where is your conscience when you think of the young Solveig, publicly humiliated? Where was it when you signed contracts based on your word of honor? My word of honor still stands for all legitimate commercial contracts, but not for marriage promises." Erik Andersson laughed bitterly. "What a convenient distinction." The tension in the salon became palpable. Astrid, who had discreetly withdrawn to the corridor but continued to listen through the half-open door, felt each accusation like a physical whip. She was the cause of this public humiliation that Magnus faced with moving dignity. "Gentlemen," Magnus stood up, indicating that the audience was coming to an end, "I appreciate your visit, but my private life is not subject to the judgment of committees, however respectable they may be. Your private life affects the entire community, when you destroy business relationships and scandalize Christians," retorted Pastor Olson. "But since you mention judgment, allow me to quote the scriptures. 'By their fruits you will know them.'" "An excellent quote, Pastor." Magnus smiled with icy irony. "Allow me to reply with another. And Jesus said, 'He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone.'" The silence that followed was charged with electrical tension. The three visitors understood that they were facing a man who would not be intimidated by social pressure or religious authority. Pastor Olson rose with offended dignity. "Very well, Magnus Eriksson. If you choose the path of obstinacy, you will reap the consequences. But know that the Church cannot approve or support behaviors that contradict established Christian customs. And know that local business cannot prosper when based on personal whims," Björn Larsen added. "There are other young businessmen in Bergen, more reliable and suitable." When the three men left, they left behind an atmosphere charged with veiled threats. Magnus remained at the window, watching the carriage drive away, aware that he had just crossed another Rubicon on his journey toward an uncertain destiny. Astrid appeared at the salon door, pale as fresh snow. "Sir, I—" "Say nothing," Magnus interrupted her softly. "Whatever your intention, say nothing you might regret later. But the consequences, your business, are my responsibility, as are my choices." He left, leaving Astrid alone in the salon, where the empty coffee cups witnessed the failed attempt at conciliation. She understood that war had been declared, and that Magnus was fighting a battle that could destroy him, all for the love of a woman he officially did not even acknowledge existed. From the tower room, Gunhild watched the carriage of the moral judges disappear around the bend in the road. She smiled secretly, recognizing in her adopted nephew the same noble stubbornness that had always characterized the Haugen men when they defended what they believed in. Some wars, she thought, adjusting the shawl over her shoulders, need to be lost publicly to be won where it really matters, in the human heart. How will Magnus face the growing isolation from the community, and what role will Gunhild play in revealing the secrets that can change everything? The January nights in Björnskogen stretched out like icy eternities, when the polar darkness swallowed the world at 3 in the afternoon and only released it 9 hours later. It was during one of these endless nights that Gunhild Haugen decided to break her silence, kept for months, revealing truths that could irreversibly alter the destiny of everyone at the villa. The tower room remained warm from the crackling fireplace, where birch logs released a sweet aroma that mixed with the lavender from the sachets scattered on the dresser. Beeswax candles cast dancing shadows on the old tapestries, creating an atmosphere of conspiratorial intimacy that invited confessions. Astrid sat in the familiar armchair next to the fireplace, reading to Gunhild a passage from Ecclesiastes, but her voice lacked its usual passion. The words came out mechanically, while her thoughts remained fixed on the progressive deterioration of Magnus's situation, the suspicious looks from the other servants, and the guilt that consumed her like a slow fever. "Stop," Gunhild interrupted softly, lowering the embroidery that rested in her lap. "Tonight it is not biblical words that I need to hear, but human truths." Astrid looked up, meeting the penetrating gaze of the elderly woman. "I don't understand, ma'am." "Oh, but you understand perfectly." Gunhild laughed softly, a sound that combined affection with benign mischief. "Did you think you could deceive the woman who taught you to walk, to talk, to embroider, who changed your diapers and cured your childhood nightmares?" Astrid closed her eyes, feeling the devastating relief of someone who could finally abandon a mask that had become unbearable. "Since when have you known?" The question emerged in an almost inaudible whisper. "Since the first day." Gunhild laughed softly, a sound that combined affection with benign mischief. "Did you think you could deceive the woman who taught you to walk, to talk, to embroider, who changed your diapers and cured your childhood nightmares?" Astrid closed her eyes, feeling the devastating relief of someone who could finally abandon a mask that had become unbearable. "Since when have you known?" "Since the first day." Gunhild laughed softly, a sound that combined affection with benign mischief. "Did you think you could deceive the woman who taught you to walk, to talk, to embroider, who changed your diapers and cured your childhood nightmares?" Astrid closed her eyes, feeling the devastating relief of someone who could finally abandon a mask that had become unbearable. "Since when have you known?" "Since the first day." Gunhild laughed softly, a sound that combined affection with benign mischief. "Did you think you could deceive the woman who taught you to walk, to talk, to embroider, who changed your diapers and cured your childhood nightmares?" Astrid closed her eyes, feeling the devastating relief of someone who could finally abandon a mask that had become unbearable. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wanted to see how far you would take this extraordinary farce, and because—" Gunhild hesitated, looking at the flames dancing in the fireplace. "Because I understood that there were deeper reasons for your lie than simple wounded pride." The elderly woman stood up with careful movements, walked to the window where the full moon illuminated the frozen landscape. For long minutes she remained silent, as if gathering the courage for revelations she had kept for decades. "Astrid," she said finally, using the true name as a caress, "there are things about our family that you never knew. About me, about your father, about the traditions we carry in our blood." "What things?" Astrid approached, intrigued by the solemn tone she had never heard in her aunt's voice. "Sit down, dear. This is a long story, and some truths are too heavy to be carried standing." Gunhild returned to her armchair, adjusted the shawl over her shoulders, and for a few seconds looked like a priestess preparing to reveal ancestral mysteries. "I loved your Uncle Björn," she began, her voice filled with an ancient melancholy. "Your father's younger brother, who died at 25 when his fishing boat sank during a storm. We were young, in love, planning to marry the following spring." Astrid listened, fascinated. She had never known that Gunhild had been engaged. She had always imagined her a spinster by choice. "Björn had something special," Gunhild continued, her eyes distant as if she were seeing through decades. "A rare ability to see connections where others saw only coincidences. He understood that the old Nordic traditions and the Christian faith were branches of the same sacred tree. It was he who taught me that our family descended from the ancient guardians of stories, people chosen to preserve ancestral wisdom through the centuries." "Guardians of stories?" "Yes." Gunhild smiled, noting the genuine interest that lit up in her niece's green eyes. "Our ancestors were skalds, sacred bards who memorized the sagas, preserved the legends, and kept alive the connection between the visible world and the hidden mysteries. When Christianity came to Norway, instead of destroying these traditions, the wisest Haugen found ways to fuse them, creating a unique lineage of guardians who served both Christ and the ancestral spirits." Astrid felt shivers run down her spine. She remembered the nights in childhood when Gunhild told stories that seemed more real than reality itself, how she had always felt a special connection to the ancient legends and her natural talent for transforming words into enchantments. "That's why you always had this gift," Gunhild confirmed as if reading her thoughts. "The ability to bring stories to life, to make people see truths through metaphors, to touch hearts with words. It's not just talent, it's a sacred inheritance." "But why are you telling me this now?" Gunhild stood up again, this time walking to an old chest in the corner of the room. From inside it, she took out an object wrapped in blue silk, an old silver necklace with a stylized hammer pendant, the symbol of Thor adapted to also incorporate the Christian cross. "Because the time has come for you to understand who you really are," she said, approaching Astrid with the necklace in her hands. "Not just a young aristocrat who lost her social position, but the last legitimate guardian of the Haugen traditions. And because," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "because Magnus Eriksson needs to know that the woman for whom he risked everything has a lineage as noble as any lady from Bergen." Astrid recoiled instinctively. "I can't reveal who I am. It would be humiliating for him after everything that happened. It would be liberating." Gunhild placed the necklace on the table between them, where the silver shone in the candlelight. "Magnus is fighting a battle he cannot win because he is fighting with the wrong weapons. Bergen society rejects him because they only see a man who chose lust over convenience. But if they knew that he chose true love for a woman of respectable ancestral lineage, a woman whose family lost everything due to her father's vices, a woman whose family went through temporary adversities, but whose blood carries centuries of spiritual nobility." Gunhild sat down again, looking directly into her niece's eyes. "Astrid, dear, social position can be lost and regained, but true dignity, the one that comes from who we are in essence, no one can take that away." The silence that followed was filled only by the crackling of the flames and the wind whispering at the windows. Astrid contemplated the necklace on the table, a tangible symbol of an inheritance she had always felt but never fully understood. "What do you want me to do?" she finally asked. "Stop hiding behind masks and take your rightful place." Gunhild held out her hand, gently touching her niece's face. "Give Magnus the chance to fight a battle he can win, because he will be fighting for true love and not for a whim. Honor our lineage, by showing that a guardian of stories never bows to foolish prejudices. Astrid closed her eyes, feeling the weight of generations of Haugen women on her shoulders. When she opened them again, there was a new determination in her green eyes. How? Gunhild smiled, recognizing the ancestral courage finally awakening in her niece. First, you will become Astrid Haugen, publicly again. Second, we will reveal our lineage of guardians, culturally legitimizing our position in society. Third, she paused dramatically, we will give Magnus the opportunity to win your love in a proper way, without lies or disguises. The plan that Gunhild began to outline was audacious, risky, but filled with the wisdom of someone who had lived for decades observing the power games of provincial society. As she spoke, Astrid felt something transform within her, the frightened maid giving way to the courageous woman she was always destined to be. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but for the first time in months it seemed to be covering the world not to hide, but to prepare for a new beginning. What revelations will emerge when Astrid finally assumes her true identity, and how will Magnus react to discovering that the woman he loves has a lineage as noble as his feelings? March arrived in Björnskogen with subtle promises of spring, hidden under the persistent harshness of the Nordic winter. The nights were still long and icy, but there was a different quality to the light that filtered through the heavy clouds, a golden paleness that whispered of longer days to come. It was during one of these nights that the sky presented a rare spectacle, an aurora borealis that danced over the fjords like veils of green and violet light, transforming the landscape into a fairy tale setting. Astrid, who a week ago had revealed her true identity to the household staff and taken her rightful place as Gunhild's niece, walked through the winter garden wrapped in a heavy wool coat and silk shawl. The transformation was surprising. Abandoning the simple maid's clothes, she emerged as the young aristocrat she had always been, wearing refined dresses that Gunhild had kept in chests for decades, family jewels that had survived the financial ruin, and her golden hair loose in waves that caught the dancing lights of the sky like strands of liquid gold. The village's reaction was mixed. Some expressed shock at the discovery that the maid was actually a member of the old Haugen family. Others whispered about deception and manipulation. But when Gunhild began to publicly tell about the ancestral lineage of the guardians of stories, showing old documents and family artifacts, public opinion gradually began to lean toward fascination with the romanticism of the situation. Magnus, initially disturbed by the revelation that he had been deceived, quickly understood the reasons behind Astrid's disguise. The anger gave way to admiration for the courage she had shown in working as a maid to support her family, and his feelings, far from diminishing, intensified with the discovery that he loved a woman of real substance, not just beauty. On this magical night, when the celestial lights painted the world with supernatural colors, Astrid sought solitude in the garden to process the dizzying changes in her life. The cold was intense, but it could not compete with the fire that burned in her heart, a mixture of hope, fear, love, and uncertainty about the future. The paths between the bare trees were covered with compacted snow that crunched under her feet like crystalline music. Ice sculptures naturally formed by the wind, and cold transformed common bushes into fantastic creatures that seemed like silent guardians of winter's secrets. The full moon provided a silvery light that competed with the dancing colors of the aurora, creating an atmosphere of enchantment that made everything seem possible. She did not notice Magnus approaching on the parallel paths until his footsteps alerted her to his presence. He appeared between the snow-covered branches like an apparition, elegant in a dark coat that highlighted the width of his shoulders, his breath forming clouds of vapor in the icy air. For a moment, they stood watching each other, aware that this meeting could define their destinies. "I was hoping you would come here," he said softly, approaching with careful steps on the slippery ground. "How did you know?" "Because this is where we first confessed ourselves to each other." Magnus stopped a few feet from her, respecting a distance that allowed for intimate conversation without impropriety. "And because I felt you would be looking for answers in the stars." Astrid looked up, where the green lights undulated like a celestial ocean. "The old legends say that the aurora borealis are the souls of dead warriors dancing in Valhalla. And what do you believe?" "I believe they are moments when the veil between worlds becomes transparent, when we can see truths that normally remain hidden." Magnus took another step toward her, encouraged by the poetic openness of her response. "What truths do you see tonight?" Astrid hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment. The question carried implications that went far beyond casual conversation. I see that some lies protect deeper truths, that true love can survive deception when the intentions are pure. That, she paused, gathering courage, that sometimes we need to lose ourselves completely to find out who we really are. And who are you, Astrid Haugen? The use of her real name, pronounced with reverent tenderness, made her heart race. I am a woman who has learned that dignity does not depend on possessions, that love knows no social boundaries, that some battles are worth losing so that the right wars can be won. Magnus smiled, recognizing in her words echoes of his own journey of discovery. Do you know what I see in these lights? Tell me. I see that some encounters are destined from before birth, that it was not a coincidence that you appeared in my life in disguise, but a cosmic necessity. He approached closer, now so close that she could feel the warmth of his body radiating through the coat. I see that what we call scandal can actually be courage, and that, his voice dropped to an intimate whisper, that some promises are too sacred to be made lightly. The intensity of his gaze made Astrid tremble, but not from the cold. What promises? The ones you make under lights that have witnessed Viking vows for 1,000 years. Magnus held out his hand, gently touching her face. Astrid Haugen, descendant of guardians of stories, daughter of a noble lineage older than any commercial fortune from Bergen, do you accept that this man loves you not despite who you are, but precisely for being who you are? The tears that ran down Astrid's cheeks froze almost immediately, but they were tears of happiness that shone like diamonds in the aurora's light. And do you accept that this woman loves you not for your position or wealth, but for the goodness of your heart and the courage of your soul? In response, Magnus took her in his arms, and their lips met in a kiss that seemed to seal not only their personal promises, but also the blessings of the ancestral spirits dancing in the lights above their heads. It was a kiss that mixed passion with reverence, desire with commitment, the present with eternity. When they separated, they remained embraced, contemplating the aurora that continued its celestial dance, aware that they had become part of a story larger than their individual lives, a saga of love that honored both ancient traditions and future hopes. What happens now? Astrid whispered against his chest. Now we go home and announce our engagement according to the old traditions, Magnus replied, caressing her hair. And we let anyone who wants to judge face not only a stubborn merchant, but also the last guardian of the Haugen legends. They returned to the villa walking hand in hand, leaving parallel footprints in the snow that would be covered by new snowfalls, but whose meaning would forever be engraved in the memory of the land that witnessed their love. Gunhild watched them from the tower window, smiling with the satisfaction of someone who sees ancestral plans finally being realized. Tonight, she thought, the stars told a new story, and it was worthy of the best family traditions. How will the community react to the official engagement between Magnus and Astrid, and what challenges will they still face to transform their love into a union respected by society? The spring of 1868 broke over Bjørnskogen with a transformative force that seemed to mirror the radical changes in the lives of its inhabitants. The ice of the fjords cracked with roars that echoed like cannons announcing victory, while the first wildflowers, small and courageous, emerged through the melting snow as symbols of rebirth and hope. The Villa Bjørnskogen buzzed with regenerating activity. Magnus, energized by the reciprocated love and the cultural legitimacy that Astrid's lineage brought to the relationship, tackled his commercial problems with renewed determination. The revelation that his fiancée was descended from a respected ancestral family, a guardian of traditions that preceded any commercial fortune from Bergen, gradually transformed public perception of his breakup with Solveig Lindberg. Pastor Olsen, initially reluctant to recognize the union, was persuaded when Gunhild presented family documents that proved the Haugen lineage as preservers of adapted Christian traditions. The finding of a 15th-century Bible with ancient runic marginalia translating sacred passages into local dialects deeply impressed the cleric, who began to see the family not as disguised pagans, but as cultural bridges between eras. The official engagement ceremony took place on a golden afternoon in April, when the villa garden finally awoke from its winter slumber. Carefully chosen guests, respectable local families, minor merchants from Bergen, artisans, and fishermen from the village, gathered in a circle around the old runic stone that had always been in the center of the garden, but now took on a special ceremonial meaning. Astrid appeared as a vision from the ancient sagas, wearing a sky-blue silk dress that had belonged to her great-grandmother, ornamented with silver threads that formed intertwined patterns reminiscent of Viking art. The sacred necklace that Gunhild had given her shone on her chest, while a crown of wild flowers, daisies, violets, and small fir branches adorned her loose golden hair. Magnus, elegant in a traditional Norwegian formal suit with silver buttons and traditional embroidery, took her hand in front of the ancestral stone, while Gunhild, taking on the role of officiant according to family customs, conducted a ceremony that mixed Christian and Nordic elements in a liturgy that resonated through the centuries. "Before these stones that saw our ancestors swear eternal love," Gunhild proclaimed in a voice that carried the authority of generations, "before the God who created us and the spirits who guide us, Magnus Eriksson and Astrid Haugen unite their destinies according to ancient traditions and a new faith. The exchange of rings, simple silver bands engraved with runes that meant love, courage, and fidelity, took place while the guests sang old ballads that spoke of unions that transcended adversities. It was a ceremony that was both intimate and deeply meaningful, establishing cultural legitimacy for a union based on true love. But the true restoration of honor occurred in the following weeks when Astrid took an active role in the community's cultural revitalization. Using her refined education and knowledge of ancestral traditions, she instituted a series of initiatives that gradually won over local hearts and minds. On Sunday afternoons after religious services, the villa's main salon was transformed into a cultural center where Astrid told stories to the village children. But they were not simple tales. They were elaborate sagas that taught moral values through the adventures of Christianized Nordic heroes, legends that showed how courage, kindness, and faith could triumph over adversities. Once upon a time, her melodious voice captivated audiences with shining eyes. There was a young fisherman named Olaf, who lived when the old gods still walked the earth. One day, Odin himself appeared disguised as a beggar, testing the generosity of mortals. The stories she wove were masterpieces of cultural adaptation, where Nordic mythological figures met Jesus Christ, where Christian values were explained through metaphors that resonated with local sensibility, where children learned as much about faith as about cultural pride. The parents, initially skeptical, soon began to bring not only their children but also friends and relatives, fascinated by the way Astrid transformed education into enchantment. Magnus contributed in a practical way, establishing a fishermen's cooperative that bought directly from local families, eliminating intermediaries from Bergen and increasing the workers' profits. The initiative suggested by Astrid, as a way to honor ancestral community traditions, proved to be not only altruistic but also commercially intelligent, creating new markets and strengthening local economic ties. The most symbolic change happened when the portrait of the Haugen family, sold during the financial crisis to a collector in Bergen, was discreetly reacquired by Magnus and reinstalled in a place of honor in the main salon. The painting, which showed Astrid at 15 alongside her parents and a young Gunhild, was a silent witness to the family continuity that had survived temporary storms. One night, as they contemplated the portrait together in the candlelight, Magnus asked, "Do you regret anything?" "The disguise, the difficulties, the winding path that brought you here." Astrid studied the painted face of her younger version, naive, protected, still ignorant of pain and loss, before replying, "That girl in the portrait could never love as I do now. I needed to lose everything to discover what I truly valued. I needed to be a maid, to learn to be a lady. And what do you value most? You, our life together. The chance to honor family traditions in a meaningful way." She turned to him, her green eyes shining with deep conviction. "But most of all, the certainty that our love was built on truth, not convenient lies." They embraced in front of the portrait that witnessed both the past and the future, aware that they had transformed scandal into romance, adversity into strength, and love into a civilizing force that benefited the entire community. Outside, the Nordic spring continued its triumphant march, melting the last vestiges of a winter that had witnessed extraordinary transformations. The fjords reflected crystalline waters, where fish leaped as a celebration of renewed life, while migratory birds returned with songs that announced times of abundance and hope. In the village, the changes were evident. Families that once whispered about the scandal now openly spoke about the lost princess who had returned to bring cultural and economic prosperity. Children played, acting out the stories Astrid told, while their mothers began to embroider ancestral patterns that she taught, creating handcrafted products that found a market in Bergen among tourists fascinated by cultural authenticity. Villa Bjørnskogen itself seemed to be rejuvenated by the love that permeated its corridors. Gardens that were once abandoned blossomed under Astrid's care, who planted medicinal herbs and flowers mentioned in the ancient sagas. The rooms once again echoed with music when she played the piano on golden afternoons, often accompanied by Magnus on the violin he had learned to play to please her. What fruits will this love cultivated in adversity bear, and how will the entire community benefit from the union that transformed scandal into inspiration? Spring of 1871, 3 years after the engagement under the Aurora Borealis, found Bjørnskogen transformed into a prosperous center of commercial and cultural activity. The villa, once a symbol of stagnant traditions, now pulsed with the energy of a future built on solid foundations of a respected past. Magnus had expanded his business far beyond the traditional timber trade. The Fishermen's Cooperative had evolved into a diversified company that processed marine products, exported local crafts, and even organized cultural excursions for visitors from Oslo and Bergen interested in experiencing authentic Norwegian rural life. The man who almost lost everything for love now prospered precisely because that love had inspired him to innovate. Astrid, now 24, blossomed into a woman of substance who combined aristocratic elegance with acquired pragmatism. Pregnant with her second child, she moved through the villa's halls with a radiant maternal serenity, overseeing both the domestic business and the cultural activities that had become her recognized specialty. Bjørn Eriksson, 2 years old, ran through the corridors with the inexhaustible energy of a beloved child, with hair as golden as his mother's and determined brown eyes like his father's. He grew up bilingual in traditions, listening to both Christian lullabies and Nordic legends, learning that cultural heritage is a more valuable treasure than material wealth. The current pregnancy promised another boy, who would be named Magnus in honor of his father, but everyone in the house already referred to the baby as Little Warrior, due to the vigorous kicks that made Astrid laugh during the afternoons when she rested in the blooming garden. "He will be strong like his father and wise like his mother," Gunhild commented, knitting tiny clothes while watching Astrid arrange roses that bloomed exuberantly in the main flower bed. Children born of true love carry a double blessing. Gunhild, now 71, remained vital and involved, having found renewed purpose as the official guardian of family traditions. Her afternoons were occupied teaching young people in the village to embroider, passing on ancestral recipes and telling stories that complemented Astrid's more elaborate narratives. The old spinster had transformed into a respected matriarch who united generations through shared wisdom. The most notable transformation, however, happened in the community itself. The village of Bjørnskogen, once isolated and economically dependent, now attracted regular visitors interested in authentic cultural tourism. Local families offered lodging in traditional houses, served meals prepared according to old recipes, and demonstrated crafts passed down through generations. Magnus, sitting in his renovated office's leather armchair, examined reports that showed constant growth in all business sectors. But his satisfaction went beyond numbers. He knew he had built something sustainable, based on solid values instead of risky speculation. "Profits are important," he explained to the young accountant he had hired from Bergen, "but they are not the ultimate goal. We want prosperity that strengthens communities, not one that destroys them." This philosophy was reflected in all his business decisions. Wages were fair, working conditions were safe, and there was always a percentage of the profits allocated for community improvements, church repairs, road maintenance, and support for families in temporary difficulty. On a golden afternoon in June, while Astrid rested in the garden with Bjørn playing at her feet, Magnus received a letter that would once again change his perspective. The sender was Hans Lindberg, the father of his ex-fiancée Solveig. "Dear Eriksson," the letter began formally, "I hope this missive finds you in good health and prosperity. I have heard that your business is flourishing admirably and that your wife has become a respected figure in the cultural circles of our region." Magnus frowned, intrigued by the conciliatory tone of a man who 3 years earlier had threatened him with commercial ruin. "I must confess that my initial anger over the breakup of the engagement was excessive. Time has brought perspective, and I can now see that you made choices based on principles, not whims. Solveig married a textile merchant from Trondheim last year and seems happy in her new life. The letter continued with a proposal for commercial reconciliation, suggesting partnerships that would benefit both companies. Magnus read it twice, recognizing the bitter irony. The man who had tried to destroy him was now asking for his cooperation, attracted by the same success that had resulted from the choices he had previously condemned. Astrid found him contemplating the letter in the office, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Bad news?" she asked, settling carefully into the armchair due to her advanced pregnancy. "On the contrary, Hans Lindberg wants a commercial reconciliation. And you?" Magnus folded the letter slowly, considering the implications. "I think I will respond positively, not out of financial need, but because forgiveness is stronger than resentment. And because," he smiled, gently touching her rounded belly, "our children will grow up in a world where we prefer to build bridges rather than feed enmities." At that moment, a child's cry of joy interrupted them. Through the window, they saw Björn running through the garden chasing butterflies, laughing with a purity that made them both smile. It was an image that symbolized everything they had achieved: simple happiness, genuine love, a hopeful future built on solid foundations. "Gunhild was right," Astrid commented, watching her son play. "Children born of true love carry a double blessing. What blessings do you see in him? The freedom to be authentic without fear of judgment, pride in his roots without social arrogance, and most of all," she paused, touching her belly where the second child was moving, "the certainty that he is loved unconditionally." Magnus knelt beside her armchair, placing his hand over hers on the belly that held their second child. "And what legacy will we leave for them? The same one Gunhild left for me. The understanding that true dignity comes from who we are, not what we possess. That traditions should be preserved because they enrich life, not because they impress others, and that genuine love is worth any sacrifice." The summer of 1871 continued golden and prosperous, with the villa and the village flourishing under the beneficial influence of a love that had transformed scandal into inspiration, adversity into strength, and tradition into innovation. Each day brought confirmation that some battles, when fought for the right reasons, generate victories that extend far beyond the original combatants. What final wisdom will Gunhild share with the family she loves so much, and how will her departure mark the beginning of a new era for the guardians of traditions? Autumn of 1871 arrived in Björnskogen with a golden melancholy that seemed to tinge every leaf, every sunbeam, every sigh of the wind that whispered ancient secrets among the bare branches. It was a season of harvests and preparations for winter, but also of reflections on life's cycles that are eternally completed and renewed. Gunhild Haugen, now 72, felt the weight of age in a way she could no longer hide. Her hands, once agile with needle and thread, trembled slightly when she embroidered. Her steps, once firm, required the support of the ancestral cane, but her eyes remained bright as the northern stars, filled with wisdom accumulated over decades of silent observation. It was on a golden October afternoon, when the leaves danced like golden confetti through the villa garden, that she summoned Astrid for a conversation that would forever change the young woman's understanding of her own identity and destiny. The tower room was warmed by the crackling fireplace, decorated with all the family symbols that had marked so many intimate conversations. The old tapestries, the oak chest, the sacred necklace now hung in a special niche, the embroideries that told silent stories through colored threads. But there was something different in the air, a solemnity that suggested final revelations. "Astrid, dear," Gunhild invited her to sit in the armchair that had become hers during so many nights of narratives. "The time has come for you to know the last secret of our lineage." "Last secret?" Astrid carefully settled in, 8 months pregnant, feeling the baby move restlessly, as if it also sensed the importance of the moment. Gunhild walked to the ancestral chest, but this time she opened a secret compartment that Astrid had never known existed. From inside it, she took out an object that made the young woman gasp, an old book bound in worn leather, with silver clasps ornamented with complex runes. "This is the Grimoire of the Guardians," Gunhild explained, carrying the volume with the reverence of someone transporting a sacred relic. "It contains 1,000 years of wisdom accumulated by the women of our family, healing recipes, dream interpretations, spiritual protections, and most of all," she paused dramatically, "prophecies about the future of the lineage." Astrid felt shivers run down her spine. "Prophecies?" "Each guardian contributed with visions about future generations. Your great-great-grandmother foresaw the Napoleonic Wars. Your great-grandmother anticipated the arrival of steamships. And Gunhild opened the book to a specific page, revealing delicate handwriting in faded ink. I wrote about you. About me? Gunhild began to read in a voice that carried the weight of decades. A guardian will be born in the lineage who will first know loss before conquest, humiliation before honor, the necessary lie before the triumphant truth. She will be a bridge between old and new worlds, uniting sacred traditions with true love. Her children will carry a double heritage, ancestral wisdom and modern courage, and through her, the lineage of the guardians will flourish in a new land, preserving our mysteries for generations yet to be born. The silence that followed was filled only by the crackling of the flames and the autumnal wind whispering at the windows. Astrid processed the words, recognizing with astonishment how every detail of the prophecy had been fulfilled in her life. When did you write that? On the day of your birth. I had a vision so clear that it seemed like a memory rather than a premonition. Gunhild sat beside her niece, gently touching her rounded belly. And I can see even further. This child you carry will be the first of a new generation of guardians, not only female guardians, but also men blessed with our special sensitivity. Magnus, too? Magnus is part of the greater plan. His soul recognized ours even before his mind understood who you were. Some loves transcend coincidence, dear. They are encounters arranged by the ancestral spirits themselves. Gunhild turned more pages of the grimoire, revealing intricate illustrations that showed spiritual family trees, maps of family migrations, and symbols that combined Christianity with even older traditions. But there is a final responsibility that I must transfer to you, she continued, reaching the last written page of the book. As the last guardian of the previous generation, I must prepare you to lead our lineage through the times to come. What times? Times of great change. The world is transforming rapidly, machines replacing manual labor, cities growing, ancient traditions being forgotten. Our mission will be to preserve what is valuable while embracing what brings progress. Gunhild took a goose feather and a small bottle of special ink from the table, prepared in advance. It is your turn to write in the grimoire. Add your own vision of the family's future. Astrid hesitated, feeling the weight of the responsibility. What if I don't have visions like you did? You will. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let your mind open to possibilities not yet manifested. Astrid obeyed, closing her eyes and allowing her consciousness to expand beyond the present moment. Gradually, images began to form in her mind. Children playing in blooming gardens, young people studying ancient books alongside modern texts, marriages that celebrated both love and tradition, and voyages to distant lands where seeds of ancestral wisdom were planted in new soils. When she opened her eyes, her hand moved automatically, guided by inspiration that seemed to come from an external source. The words flowed from the pen as if dictated by the spirits themselves. The lineage of the guardians will spread its roots beyond the icy fjords, carrying Nordic light to distant continents. The children of my children's children will preserve our wisdom in lands where the sun does not set in summer and does not rise in winter. Ancient traditions will find new expressions, and the love that unites heaven and earth will continue to flourish through countless generations. Wherever there are hearts open to receive our heritage, there our family will find new homes. When she finished writing, Astrid looked at the words with surprise, as if she had received them rather than created them. Gunhild smiled with deep satisfaction. Perfect. Now the grimoire is ready for the next era. She closed the book carefully, wrapping it in blue silk. This will be your most precious treasure, more valuable than any jewel or property. Guard it, study it, and when the time comes, pass it on to the one of your children who demonstrates a special sensitivity to our heritage. How will I know which one? You will know, just as I knew that you were the chosen one since you were born. At that moment, hurried footsteps echoed on the tower stairs. Magnus appeared at the door, his face illuminated by excitement and concern. Astrid, darling, I think it's time. Have the contractions started? Only then did Astrid realize that during the intense revelation, her body had begun the process of labor. The spiritual emotions had awakened physical responses, as if the baby had chosen this sacred moment to make its entrance into the world. The little warrior has chosen a dramatic moment, Gunhild laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. Go, dear. Your destiny as a mother and a guardian is officially beginning. As Magnus helped Astrid down from the tower, Gunhild remained holding the grimoire, knowing that she had just transferred a sacred responsibility to capable hands. Outside, the first stars appeared in the autumnal sky, witnessing the moment when a new era of the guardians of stories began. What extraordinary birth will mark the beginning of a new generation, and how will Gunhild find peace, knowing that the ancestral legacy is safe in loving hands? The dawn of October 15, 1871, broke over Björnskogen with a golden serenity that seemed to bless the extraordinary events of the previous night. In the villa's main room, where generations of Haugen had come into the world, the newest member of the family rested, Sigrid Eriksson, a girl with hair as dark as her father's and eyes that already promised the green color of her mother's fjords. Astrid, exhausted but radiant, held her daughter against her chest while watching the garden through the window, where the first autumn leaves danced golden in the crystalline air. The birth was easier than the first, as if the spiritual revelation of the previous afternoon had prepared her body and soul to receive this new life destined to carry a sacred heritage. Magnus could not hide his paternal fascination, alternating his attention between his wife and daughter, with a tenderness that made Astrid smile despite her tiredness. "She was born at the exact moment of the grimoire's passage," he commented in wonder, as if she knew she was expected for a special mission. "All children are born for special missions," Astrid corrected gently, "but some carry responsibilities that transcend their own lives." From the garden, children's voices rose in joyful play. Björn, now 3, had invented a game where he represented heroes from the stories his mother told, running among the trees with an imaginary wooden sword, fighting invisible dragons and saving princesses that only he could see. The arrival of Sigrid marked not only the expansion of the family, but also the culmination of transformations that had begun 4 years earlier with a young aristocrat disguised as a maid. Villa Björnskogen now represented a model of how tradition and progress could coexist harmoniously, creating prosperity that benefited the entire community without sacrificing ancestral values. 3 days after the birth, when Astrid already felt strong enough to receive visitors, Gunhild appeared in the room carrying a special gift, a small shawl knitted with wool threads dyed according to ancient techniques, ornamented with patterns that told silent stories through intertwined stitches. "For the new guardian," she said, carefully wrapping the baby in the fabric that would radiate spiritual protection. Each stitch was woven with blessings for a long life, deep wisdom, and abundant love. "Gunhild?" Astrid noticed something different in her aunt's voice, an ethereal quality that aroused a subtle alarm. "Are you well?" "I am complete," the elderly woman replied, sitting in the armchair next to the bed. "I have fulfilled all the missions that the spirits destined for me. I have seen our lineage continued in capable hands, witnessed true love triumph over foolish prejudices, and now," she gently touched Sigrid's rosy face, "I have met the girl who will carry our heritage into a new century." The words carried the weight of a farewell that made Astrid instinctively hug her daughter. "Don't talk like that, my dear child," Gunhild smiled with infinite tenderness. "There is no sadness in completeness, only gratitude for having lived long enough to see all the threads of the tapestry connected properly." During the following weeks, Gunhild dedicated herself to the last transmissions of knowledge. She taught Astrid recipes for herbal medicines, explained the hidden meanings of family traditions, and told stories she had never shared before about distant relatives who had emigrated to America and Australia, carrying seeds of the Haugen wisdom to new continents. "Our family is like a dandelion," she explained on a golden afternoon while watching Björn play in the garden. "It may seem small and delicate, but when the wind blows, it scatters seeds over incalculable distances. Each seed creates a new plant that produces more seeds, multiplying our presence throughout the world." The final moment came on a serene November night, when the first snow of winter covered Björnskogen with a white cloak that symbolized purity and transition. Gunhild, who had spent the day teaching Astrid the last ancestral lullabies, retired to her tower room with an expression of deep peace. Magnus found her the next morning, reclining in her favorite armchair in front of the window that offered a panoramic view of the icy fjords. She seemed to be sleeping, but there was a smile on her lips that suggested pleasant dreams, and her hands held a letter addressed to Astrid. The letter, written in delicate handwriting that trembled only slightly, contained a farewell that mixed practical instruction with spiritual blessing. "My dear Astrid, guardian of the new era, when you read these words, I will already be reunited with the spirits who have been calling me for months. Do not mourn my departure, for it was chosen by me at the perfect moment. after seeing our lineage safe in your loving hands. The grimoire contains everything you need to know to lead our family through the times to come. Trust your intuition, honor our traditions without becoming a slave to them, and always remember that true love is a more powerful force than any ancestral magic. Your children will grow up knowing that they descend from a special lineage, but teach them humility along with pride. May they understand that being a guardian of stories means serving others, not dominating over them. Magnus is a rare blessing, a man who understands the value of traditions without feeling threatened by them. Together, preserve our heritage, but do not hesitate to adapt it for a changing world. One day, perhaps when you are as old as I was, one of your descendants will need to make choices similar to the ones you made. May she find in your memory the inspiration to be as brave as you were. Sleep well, dear. The stars are singing songs of welcome for me. With eternal love, Gunhild. The funeral took place according to family traditions that mixed Christianity with old Nordic customs. The stone church was packed, not only with local residents, but with visitors from Bergen and even Oslo, who had come to pay homage to the woman who had become a living legend. Pastor Olsen, who had learned to respect the Haugen's cultural adaptations, conducted a ceremony that honored both the Christian faith and Gunhild's ancestral heritage. Astrid read passages from the sagas that her aunt loved, transforming lament into a celebration of a full life and a purpose fulfilled. When the icy earth covered the simple pine wooden coffin, Astrid held Sigrid in her arms while Björn clutched her skirt, both children silent as if they instinctively understood the solemnity of the moment. Magnus remained at her side, a silent force that offered support without words. "What happens now?" he asked when they returned to the villa that seemed strangely empty, without Gunhild's vibrant presence. "Now we continue," Astrid replied in a firm voice despite the tears. "We continue telling stories, preserving traditions, loving genuinely. We continue being worthy of the heritage she left us." On this night, she went up to the now empty tower for the first time, carrying Sigrid in her arms. The room remained exactly as Gunhild had left it, impregnated with her aroma of lavender and ancient wisdom. The grimoire rested on the table, awaiting a new guardian. Astrid sat in the familiar armchair, opened the book to the last page she had written, and began to read to her daughter, who did not yet understand words, but seemed to absorb the intention through her mother's melodious voice. "The lineage of the Guardians will spread its roots beyond the icy fjords." From the snow-covered garden, Björn watched the golden light that shone in the tower window, aware that something important was happening, although he did not fully understand what. He would return to his playing tomorrow, inventing new adventures based on the stories his mother told, but tonight he remained quiet, respecting a mystery he felt more than he understood. Magnus found his wife and daughter in the tower an hour later, embracing them silently as they contemplated the fjords illuminated by the full moon through the window. It was an image of a united family that honored the past while building the future, a tradition that adapted without being corrupted, a love that transformed adversity into strength. 10 years later, Villa Bjørnskogen had become a cultural center recognized throughout Norway. Astrid, now a mother of 4 children, had established an informal school where children from the region learned both mathematics and languages, as well as ancestral legends and artisanal traditions. Björn at 13 showed a natural talent for narrative that promised to continue the family lineage, while Sigrid, at 10, already showed a special sensitivity for medicinal plants and symbolic embroidery. Magnus had prospered beyond his most optimistic expectations, but wealth had never become the ultimate goal. Every business he started aimed to benefit the community. Every commercial decision considered the impact on local traditions, and every success was shared with employees who had become an extended family. The grimoire of the Guardians continued to grow, with Astrid regularly adding discoveries about healing plants, dream interpretations, and most of all, stories about international visitors who came seeking the authenticity they found in Bjørnskogen. Some took seeds of the Haugen wisdom to distant countries, fulfilling ancestral prophecies about a lineage that would spread throughout the world. On the last golden afternoon of autumn in 1881, exactly 10 years after Gunhild's death, Astrid sat in the garden watching her children play among colored leaves that danced in the crystalline air. Björn told stories to his younger siblings, using branches as swords and stones as castles, transforming education into enchantment exactly as she had always done. Magnus joined her on the stone bench where so many important decisions had been made. taking her hand with a gesture that had remained unchanged through all the seasons of their lives together. "Do you regret anything?" he asked, echoing the question he had asked years before. Astrid contemplated her family, her home, her prosperous community, her legacy preserved and multiplied. Only that Gunhild cannot see how her seeds have blossomed. "But she can," Magnus smiled, pointing to Sigrid, who was embroidering complex patterns while singing an ancestral song in a voice as pure as crystal. "Every time a tradition is preserved, every time love triumphs over prejudice, every time someone chooses courage instead of convenience, she sees." Astrid squeezed his hand, understanding deeply that some victories transcend individual mortality. She had been raised to preserve an ancestral heritage, but she ended up discovering that the true legacy does not reside in objects or knowledge, but in lives transformed by love that touches hearts through generations. When darkness covered Björnskogen on this special night, golden light shone in all the windows of the villa, where a united family silently celebrated 10 years of a love that had transformed scandal into inspiration, adversity into strength, and tradition into innovation. It was an ending that was also a beginning, a conclusion that promised continuity, a story that generated countless other stories. The stars shone over the icy fjords as they always had, eternal witnesses that some loves are destined from before birth, some encounters are arranged by the ancestral spirits themselves, and some stories deserve to be told through the centuries because they capture eternal truths about human courage, preserved dignity, and a love that conquers all.